Basically, we keep talking about, Lord forbid, if something happened to the both of us, but what if something happened to one of us and then the other one is still here?
See, and that's where we differ, because
that's where we differ.
You look at me like, you're gonna be strict. You ain't.
For years, everyone swallowed one easy version of events. That Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker simply drifted away. Two powerful lives, different directions, a soft, polite goodbye. But that version was a lie, because while the cameras showed celebrations, a quiet battle was raging behind closed doors. And tonight, that battle erupts into daylight. Riley Burruss has finally detonated the truth nobody saw coming. She didn't whisper like a child afraid of consequences. She didn't act for sympathy. She didn't dull the blade. She swung it, not as rumor, not as spectacle, but as a wound. According to Riley, this breakup was never about cash. It had nothing to do with celebrity. It wasn't even about romance. It was about domination. Two grown people under one roof, but training their children like opposing armies. One preaching comfort, the other enforcing endurance. One stacking futures, the other sealing exits. And the kids? They stood locked in the crossfire of a home that glittered on the surface, but was rotting quietly within. Now Riley is saying what the world was never meant to hear. That Todd wasn't just absent. He was calculating. That structure wasn't support. It was weight. That lessons didn't feel like wisdom, and more like quiet cruelty. And inside those walls, preference replaced protection, distance replaced care, and love slowly turned into a weapon. This isn't just a tale of divorce. It's a family imploding without mercy, of siblings turned into opponents, of trust turned into bargaining chips, and of a daughter who finally decided she would no longer bleed in silence. Because when a daughter finally speaks, she doesn't just reveal history, she buries it. And what Riley Burruss just unleashed could be the darkest page ever written in the Burruss Tucker story.
You're gonna give them that, and you're gonna. I'm like, that's not true.
That's what you give off.
Yeah, it's definitely different. And not even that, but I think you guys treat your kids' lifestyles very different.
Look at this view.
16, got a high-rise apartment in the city.
Kayla said she's going to New York.
Wait, what?
Only thing I did tell her, at least if you are gonna go, you should work, stack some money.
For over 10 years, the Burruss Tucker union was marketed as invincible, a dynasty, a headline romance, a fairy tale nobody dared question. From the outside, it looked polished. From the inside, Riley Burruss says it was cracking open. She insists the damage didn't explode. It whispered itself into ruin. And when Riley finally opened her mouth, she wasn't angry. She was empty. People close to the fallout say Riley didn't speak from spite. She spoke from burnout. Because for years, she claims, what passed as order was really dominance. What was sold as discipline felt like consequence. And what looked like guidance slowly became authority. The version the world accepted was easy. Two driven adults, packed calendars, a quiet goodbye. But Riley says the truth had nothing to do with timing. It was about endurance. She alleges Todd Tucker didn't drift away by mistake. He disengaged on purpose. Not loud, not cruel in public, just distant. Riley claims Todd didn't vanish from the household. He rewired it. She says warmth wasn't absent, it was allocated, offered sparingly, taken away with intent. And whether deliberate or not, she says the outcome never changed. Separation. She claims every argument turned into a teachable moment. Every feeling was labeled overreaction. Every limit was dismissed as defiance. And the children? They were evaluated more than embraced. Riley alleges Todd didn't parent like a dad. He operated like an executive. Affection came with fine print. Help required performance. Praise gave way to judgment. And what cut Riley deeper than anything, she says, wasn't the critiques. It's that she was filed away. She's fragile. She's entitled. She'd fail without her mother. Those lines, Riley says, trailed her everywhere. At the table. In hushed talks she wasn't part of. In outcomes chosen before she entered the room. And while Riley carried labels, she says Kayla carried demand. Kayla had expectations. Riley had barricades. And inside that imbalance, competition was born. Not from envy, but from necessity. Two daughters trying to survive under two separate rulebooks. Riley says Kayla thought Kandi shielded Riley. Riley says she believed Todd armored Kayla. And once those thoughts set like stone, so did the quiet. Family meals turned into wordless wars. Vacations became theater. Getaways became negotiations. Grins stayed glued on. Faith was gone. And then came the instant Riley says detonated the past. The present. The vehicle. What strangers praised as kindness. Riley says blew open something long sealed shut. According to her, the sports car wasn't a gift. It was taken as a verdict. A verdict that value in that house flowed from one direction. And from One Direction alone. She says that night, the home didn't breathe like a home. It functioned like a tribunal. Finger pointing. Shifting voices. Silence that wasn't gentle, it was engineered. And she says the words that came after didn't fade, they sliced. This is why your daughter is unbearable. Riley says that line didn't hit a wall. It nested in her chest. And when Kayla later posted online, step families are never real families. Something shattered for good. From then on, Riley says, it stopped being a family. It became scaffolding waiting to fall. Not suddenly, not publicly, but surely. And Riley says, the fall didn't arrive as noise. It arrived as space. By here in the story, Riley admits what followed stunned even her. The house didn't blow apart. It emptied out. Todd didn't storm away. He dissolved. Riley claims that by mid-2025, Todd no longer belonged to one address. He was balancing two lives. New York, Atlanta. Messages shrank. Replies stalled. Being there was traded for reasons not to be. And then, Riley says, without a sound, Kandi stripped Todd's last name from her digital world. No headline. No statement. Just deletion. Sources close to them say that wasn't marketing. That was bracing. Because by then, this wasn't about holding on. It was about outlasting what holding on had become. And Riley claims the real ending didn't arrive in legal mail. It arrived in absence. She says Todd didn't abandon Kandi. He abandoned the house. And when Kandi tried to stop him, Riley says his words weren't soft. They were sealed. I'm done acting. That's when Riley says something in her mother unlocked. Not fury. Freedom. But Riley says what followed stunned everyone more than the split. Applause. Riley claims Kayla didn't grieve the breakup. She staged it. A gathering. Laughter. Clips online. And a line Riley says was never meant for family eyes. At last, he's liberated. Riley says she saw it. And the feeling inside her went flat. Because all at once, the picture made sense. This wasn't chaos. It was chess. This wasn't strain. It was design. And Riley says, it didn't start here. It was passed down.
Personally, I'd be in a bit of a situation.
No, that's not.
Yes, I would.
You would not. That's not true.
I would be.
I don't think you
You know
would
what?
agree to give her the apartments and stuff that I would agree
That's
to.
not true.
I think
That's
it's
not
also
true.
how much I spend. Like, I don't think you would allow me to be part of the decision as much as I am with my mom.
If then you would say, yeah, well,
The difference in parenting wasn't small. It was structural. One model was comfort. The other was character. And Riley says the house could never decide which one it wanted to be. According to her, Todd viewed outcomes. Kandi viewed impact. Todd tracked results. Kandi tracked resilience. The clash wasn't personal. It was philosophical.
figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Do you think he would do that?
Well, Daddy,
You think? So you
We
think?
all think that,
Time
not
out.
just me.
No, my dream is to teach you to be self-sufficient. And you know what?
do that.
Time out.
Don't give them everything.
Can I say what I'm saying?
Go ahead.
For you to be independent, if you get my money, it's a bonus.
life lesson.
If your parents,
I didn't want to raise children who depended on money. I wanted to raise children who could survive without it. Todd thought like a businessman. I thought like a mother. That difference didn't soften with time. It separated us. And Riley says somewhere inside that ideological war, empathy was misplaced. Decisions were debated, but feelings were dismissed. She claims that Kayla became guarded. She became isolated. And instead of uniting, they were quietly set against each other. Not with words, with positioning. Riley claims Kayla's influence over Todd grew, and her own voice faded. Text messages replaced conversations. Assumptions replaced communication. And slowly, every disagreement became allegiance-based. You weren't just disagreeing. You were choosing sides. And once sides existed, there was no family left. Only lines.
I'm not here to teach you.
And that's a perfect word. You always want to teach a lesson. Everything is like, oh, she needs
Yeah.
to learn a lesson.
And plus, you have a mom instinct. He thinks business-wise all the time. It's never daddy in business. It's business most of the time.
Am I going to have a tipping allowance?
I never have an allowance. Now we're in the summers, but you don't know how to show affection.
I'm trying to make you tough, kid.
Sometimes it felt like we were living in the same house, but in two different realities. And the divorce didn't happen overnight. It was forming quietly inside us long before it ever reached paper. According to Riley, by the time the divorce became public, emotionally, it was already ancient. People were just catching up to what the house already knew. And as the marriage cracked, so did the businesses. Riley now alleges the empire wasn't immune. Old Lady Gang, Blaze Steak, Tucker Productions, the trucking ventures. According to her, the machine began slowing. Not collapsing, but coughing. Deals paused. Conversations cooled. Energy drained. And then came whispers of paperwork. The prenup. According to Riley, that document didn't just divide wealth. It revealed intention. She claims Todd's position was limited, and Kandi's protection was precise. To fans, one question echoed louder than the rest. Was this marriage a partnership? Or a contract with an expiration date? And if the answer terrified Todd, was walking away easier than staying powerless? Riley doesn't say that, but the implication sits in the silence. And silence, she says, has always been the loudest thing in that house. And as the public tried to make sense of the fallout, something else quietly changed. Not on camera, not in interviews, not in headlines, in energy. According to people close to the family, the mood inside the Burruss, Tucker world became unfamiliar almost immediately. Phones stopped ringing. Texts went unanswered. Conversations that once lasted hours were now reduced to a single sentence. And according to Riley, something that had always been background noise finally became loud. Silence. She claims that after Todd stepped away from the house, the illusion didn't shatter. It evaporated. And once the illusion was gone, no one knew how to stand inside the truth. Riley alleges that what hurt most was not the departure. It was what followed. No apology tour. No emotional reckoning. No, let's fix this. Instead, she says she witnessed people choosing sides without saying which side they were on. Support became selective. Information became currency. And trust became optional. Riley claims she realized something unsettling. That some people around the family were not reacting like a marriage had ended. They were reacting like a transaction had failed. According to her, discussions that once revolved around emotions and repair slowly shifted into territory that sounded colder. Assets. Divisions. Future positioning. And in that moment, Riley says it dawned on her. This was no longer personal. It was procedural. Around this time, online watchers began noticing subtle changes too. No official statements. No public response. But small things. A shared photo disappearing. A name missing. A birthday posted, without the person who once stood next to it. And then came the rumors. Not about love, but about leverage. Fans began circulating theories that this divorce would not be fought emotionally, but strategically. The more quiet the family became, the louder speculations grew. And Riley did nothing to stop them. According to people close to her, she wasn't encouraging chaos. She was exhausted by correction. For years, she says, she had watched the family narrative be edited, softened, cleaned, packaged. And now, she claims she no longer cared to adjust public perception. If people were going to talk, they might as well talk honestly. Because according to Riley, the peace everyone believed existed inside that house was never peace. It was compliance. She alleges that emotional labor in that home was expected, but emotional reward was not guaranteed. And when that pattern finally collapsed, everything attached to it collapsed too. Friendships, partnerships, business confidence. She suggests that people around Todd began behaving differently. Less warmth, more calculation. And that was the first time she realized the family had not just been affected, it had been assessed. According to online analysts, shortly after the separation became public, business activity linked to the Tucker name showed visible shifts. Some projects slowed, some conversations stalled, others simply disappeared from radar. Fans questioned whether coincidence was at play, or consequence. And Riley didn't deny either. She merely said, "Watch who stays quiet. They're the ones with the most to lose." That line circulated heavily. And then came the detail that triggered something deeper. Riley allegedly hinted that some conversations between Todd and outside parties had been happening long before the household broke. Not through public channels, not with transparency, but quietly, strategically. She never named names, but she allowed the implication to exist. And implication is where the internet thrives. Soon enough, speculation turned darker. Not about affairs, not about scandals, but about narrative control. Online watchers started piecing timelines together. Who stopped appearing when? Who started appearing more often? Who seemed suddenly confident? And who looked carefully absent? There was no single accusation, just an uncomfortable realization. This divorce wasn't unfolding randomly. It was unfolding deliberately. And Riley's silence in the middle of it all? People misread it. They thought she was protecting peace. She says she was protecting truth. Because according to her, what had already happened was heavier than anything people were guessing. And then she said something that changed tone entirely. She suggested that at one point, her mother was pressured to remove someone from the household. Not publicly, not dramatically, privately. The implication wasn't about control of space. It was about control of influence. Riley never stated it outright. She didn't have to. The emotional damage in her voice did the work for her. If true, this wasn't a family dispute. It was power redistributed through pressure. And Riley insists the effects still remain. She claims some wounds don't bleed. They echo. And one of the strongest echoes, according to her, came from watching two daughters stand on opposite sides, while the adults responsible stood safely apart. By now, the internet was no longer just watching. It was dissecting. Podcasts broke down every line Riley had spoken. Fans found clips from years ago that suddenly looked different. Body language once dismissed now appeared weighted. Jokes were reclassified as warnings. And interviews that once felt lighthearted now looked layered. The public didn't ask if Riley was emotional. They asked if she was revealing. And that question shifted the narrative completely. According to social reactions, many fans were no longer trying to decide who was wrong. They wanted to know something far more unsettling. Who benefited? Because where chaos is random, no one wins. But when chaos is architectural, somebody always does. And quietly, another theory started forming. That this divorce was not the beginning of an ending. It was the middle of an exit strategy. Not emotional. Operational. Riley never confirmed this. She didn't have to. The breadcrumbs she dropped were heavy enough. She said, "There are people smiling right now who were never neutral." And once that sentence landed, everything after it felt colder. The internet didn't ask who had left the marriage. They asked who had escaped it. By this point, public perception had split cleanly. Some believed Riley was emotional. Others believed she was late. Late to a truth that had been waiting for years. And the most dangerous part? She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't crying for the camera. She wasn't begging to be believed. She was documenting. And documentation is not for comfort. It's for record. And as more fans revisited old footage, a new pattern emerged. Whenever Todd spoke publicly toward the end, it wasn't with warmth. It was with detachment. With corporate calm. With a voice trained not to flinch. Which brought the audience back to the same question. Was this marriage falling apart? Or had it been quietly dismantled? Because collapse feels violent. This felt measured. And Riley, for the first time, allowed herself to say the part no one else would. We weren't breaking down. We were being phased out. That line didn't trend. It unsettled. Because when something breaks, it can be repaired. But when something is phased out, it's replaced. And that leaves one final thought hanging in the air. If this wasn't disorder, then whose order was it? And by the time the internet realized something irreversible had happened, the story had already evolved into something darker than a divorce. It had become a reckoning. Because at this stage, no one was asking if the marriage had failed. They were asking whether it had ever truly existed. According to those watching closely, the aftermath did not look like heartbreak. It looked like repositioning. Statements were cautious. Silence was strategic. And the people who once appeared inseparable now resembled strangers carefully orbiting a shared past they refused to touch. Riley's words didn't calm the storm. They sharpened it. Not because she accused, but because she remembered. And memory, when spoken aloud, has a strange power. It pulls threads people forgot existed. Old interviews resurfaced. Body language was reanalyzed. Moments once considered harmless now looked misaligned. The internet did what it always does when it senses deception. It zoomed in, frame by frame. People replayed jokes that no longer sounded funny. Comments that once felt casual were now reclassified as warnings. Even smiles were examined like evidence. And in the middle of that audit, a question kept reappearing. Was Todd walking away? Or was he being forced out by something no one was allowed to discuss? Riley never named a villain. She didn't need one. The vacuum did the job for her. Because absence has weight. And Todd's absence wasn't emotional alone. It was logistical, physical, measurable. According to online tracking, he didn't just disappear from family life. He disappeared from familiar spaces. Places he once frequented no longer welcomed him. Inner circles subtly tightened. Conversations quietly shifted. And to many observers, it looked less like escape and more like exile. No accusations were made publicly. No papers were presented. But fans noticed something else. Distance. And distance is rarely random. At this stage, the narrative wasn't being driven by interviews anymore. It was being driven by pattern recognition. Who stopped showing up? Who moved forward untouched? Who remained silent? And who suddenly had everything to say? Riley, meanwhile, stopped explaining. Her tone changed. Not angrier, calmer. And when people calm down after years of being quiet, it's rarely because the situation improved. It's because they accepted what it cost. She didn't beg for sympathy. She didn't ask to be believed. She stopped persuading altogether. And instead, she started documenting. Every interview from that point forward felt less like emotion, and more like closure. Final, precise, unnegotiable. Because according to Riley, some endings do not crush. They solidify. And when something hardens, it doesn't collapse again. It stays broken. Meanwhile, conversation around the businesses intensified. Not with facts, with fear. Fans began speculating whether the brands once built as symbols of unity were now liabilities. Whether partnerships would survive silence. Whether loyalty could exist without access. And Riley never confirmed any of it. She simply said, "You'll know what mattered, by what still stands." That line traveled fast. Because it didn't promise answers. It promised outcomes. And outcomes are louder than accusations. By now, the public wasn't wondering who caused the divorce. They were wondering who survived it. Who adapted. Who advanced. And who vanished. Riley's truth didn't point fingers. It drew maps. Maps of silence. Maps of disappearance. Maps of behavior. And the public followed them through old footage. Old tweets. Old bookings. Old friendships. The more the timeline aligned, the less comfortable it became. Because patterns don't lie. They repeat. Some viewers began suggesting this divorce functioned less like a breakup. And more like a removal. Not of a husband, but of influence. Of position. Of access. Riley never said the word power. But everything she described circled it. And that frightened people. Because it suggested something deeper than heartbreak was at play. It suggested reengineering. Not of love, but of leverage. Near the end of one of her final comments, Riley dropped a sentence so quietly. Most people missed it. "One day, I'll tell the part I'm not ready to say yet." That statement changed everything. Not because of what it revealed, but because of what it delayed. The public realized they were watching a story stop early, not end. Because when someone pauses a confession mid-sentence, it's rarely because they ran out of truth. It's because they ran into consequence. From that moment on, every future silence became heavier. Riley wasn't quoted the same. Not dismissed. Not doubted. Delayed. Like someone whose words had weight. But not permission. And in the background of all this, life continued. Quietly. Unapologetically. Weddings happened. Business moved forward. Photos were posted. Smiles were staged. But the feeling remained. Something unresolved hovered. Not in headlines. In absence. And the scariest part? Nothing publicly exploded. No lawsuits. No breakdowns. No viral confessionals. Just quiet separation. And the eerie stability that follows something that was never repaired. Which led fans to the final, unsettling thought. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive as honesty. It arrives as distance. And in that distance, stories aren't denied. They're buried. Riley didn't expose a monster. She exposed a mechanism. One that doesn't scream. It reorganizes. And the deeper the audience went, the clearer it became. This story was never about a marriage failing. It was about a system finishing. And when systems finish, they don't collapse loudly. They disappear cleanly, leaving only one question behind. If this wasn't chaos, then whose design was it? The truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it dissolves. And what Riley Burruss left behind in her words wasn't an ending. It was a warning. Because if this story has taught us anything, it's that families don't always collapse from betrayal alone. Sometimes they fracture from control, silence, and survival. And the most dangerous secrets? They aren't hidden. They're normalized. So the question isn't whether everything has been said yet. The question is, what hasn't been allowed to be said? Because when someone tells you they're done talking, it often means they're finally ready to start telling the truth. And Riley's truth didn't come with anger. It came with restraint, with precision, with the calm of someone who has nothing left to protect. That's what makes it unsettling. If you're still watching, you're not here for drama. You're here for the part that doesn't make the headlines. The part that lives in behavior, not statements. In movement, not comments. And what happens next in this story won't be announced. It will be noticed. In who disappears. In who advances. In what quietly survives. And what doesn't. So pay attention. Not to what's being said, but to what's being avoided. Because closure doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it looks like silence that refuses to break. And if Riley decides to speak again, it won't be to clarify. It will be to confirm. So stay with the story. Watch the patterns. Track the absences. And remember, the loudest endings don't always come with noise. They come with disappearance. If you believe the truth should never be edited. If you believe silence doesn't mean innocence. And if you believe stories like this don't vanish. They just wait. Then subscribe. Because when the next line is crossed, you won't hear it. You'll feel it.